This video was sponsored by W Energy. Use code TV10 and get 10% off of your order. If we came into contact with an advanced alien civilization right now, one of the quickest and most apparent issues to arise would be communication. Humans have some pretty complex ways of communicating. We can use our voices to speak, we can write things down, and we can do things like point, fold our arms, or smile to quickly send someone a message. Not to mention sign language, which is a completely silent yet unbelievably efficient way of speaking. The problem is, the more advanced our communication gets, the more intertwined it becomes with our anatomy, and this is the case for many other intelligent species here on Earth. For example, bees. Not only do they form complex societies at home with workers, nannies, and a queen, but they relay information about nearby water and pollen sources outside of the hive through a system of dancing. We as humans can understand them to some extent, but we can't directly communicate with them. In fact, we have a hard time figuring out other human languages here on Earth, so where would we even start with a species that evolved in a different part of the galaxy? Is it even possible to communicate beyond the barriers of language? Well, put a pin in that thought for now, because we're gonna find the answer in the main subject of this video. So strap in tight, call your mom, and confess your true feelings about your girlfriend's cooking, because it's the end of the world.
It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of...
Human history is littered with wars, empires, and conquest, many of which have led to the destruction of entire cultures. Works of art, recipes, clothing, architecture, and even entire bloodlines have been wiped out in the endless cycles of human prosperity and anguish. But through all this suffering, our ancestors were able to push through with the hope that we would have it better. And in the broadest sense, knock on wood, things are looking okay. Posterity is like the opposite of ancestry. It refers not to the generations that shaped you and the world you live in, but rather the generations that will inherit the world, the ones that will precede you. It's one of the big contenders for the meaning of life, creating a strong family, not just because of how it plays into traditional ideas of survival and reproduction, but because of how intimately it ties in with our history. The earliest humans, even before agricultural society, formed packs and kinships that became the foundation of civilization. The main topic of today's video, the end of the world, stands in direct contrast to many of these fundamental ideas. Hope for a better future has a hard time existing alongside the reality that an asteroid, aliens, or nuclear weapons could destroy us in an instant. Not just us, but everything we've built, both physically and culturally. Today we're going to examine how the apocalypse has shaped our existence over the past 10,000 years, why, across the Earth, societies have become independently obsessed with these world-ending scenarios, and which ones may actually lead to the extinction of the human race. My name is Luke Wilson, and I make videos about the mysterious facets of our existence. Help me pay off my student loans by dropping a like, sharing with a friend, and if you like this type of content, subscribe for more. So we're going to start off this video with 2012. It was this big scare where the Mayan calendar was coming to an end and people thought that the world was going to end.
It's all a load of crap.
This was coming after Y2K and 9/11, so people were kind of itching for more end-of-the-world scenarios. There was war in the Middle East, there was North Korea with nukes, there's aliens, because there's always aliens. It wasn't taken very seriously, and even these days people are very dismissive of the 2012 panic, but there's actually a lot to unpack and learn from it, and even evidence to support the idea that the world did end, or at the very least faced major changes beginning around the year 2012. In the year 2000 BC, a budding empire began spreading throughout what is modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. The Mayan civilization would quickly become one of the most advanced societies in the world, and by the 10th century AD, it would, like all great empires, collapse and leave us with more questions than answers. Despite the Mayans lasting for close to 3 millennia, it wasn't until relatively recently that we started to understand who they were. In 1839 and 1840, an expedition led by John Lloyd Stevens and Frederick Catherwood was the first major archaeological mission and documentation of the area. And this would not only reveal a landslide of brand new, never-before-seen information, but it would begin turning heads as historians quickly began to notice how highly advanced the Mayans had become, completely isolated from the rest of the world far before the era of globalization. One of the most important discoveries about the Mayan civilization was their extensive knowledge of natural and cosmological cycles. This arguably stood at the center of their culture and was used to design their architecture and track important dates through an intricately designed calendar system. By the mid-1900s, this calendar system had been completely deciphered thanks to archaeologists like J. Eric Thompson and Tatiana Proskuryakov, both of which specifically studied the Mayans and contributed immensely to our understanding of their entire existence. Specifically, Tatiana Proskuryakov made huge advancements in our understanding of how Mayans recorded their history and how their calendars played into their culture. These days, you'll hear a lot about the Mayan calendar, but there are actually 3 Mayan calendars in total. The first one, the Hab, almost perfectly matches with our modern calendar, with 365 days to track the Earth's movement around the sun. It seems like an insane guess, but not if you understand the theory behind it. No matter where you are on planet Earth, it takes a little over 365 days to pass around the sun. This can be seen by observing constellations, the sun's position in the sky, or the change in seasons. The seasons in particular are very important because they provide a framework for crop harvesting and storage, the driving force of early human civilization. Whether or not they knew the entire Earth was moving around the sun, the 365-day rotation became an effective and reliable way to keep track of time, often referred to as the solar calendar. The lunar calendar is just as important, however, as it tracks the roughly 30-day cycle of the moon phases. The knowledge of the moon phases not only tracks time on a smaller scale, but it happens to line up almost perfectly with the cycle of human fertility. This is something that the Mayans were not only aware of, but held in high regard, as they seemingly used it to create their second calendar, the Tzolk'in. It runs on a 260-day rotation, consisting of 2 repeating sets of 13 symbols and 20 numbers, respectively. The idea, from what we understand, is that every day has a unique combination of 1 symbol and 1 number, creating this kind of Mayan zodiac system where your birthday says something about your personality. That's pretty cool, and then you realize that 260 days is about 9 lunar cycles, or about the time it takes a child to develop in the womb. This means that a couple could conceive a child on a particular day, accurately determine when he or she would be born, and, according to their beliefs, decide on their personality. Although there weren't any 260-day calendars found in other parts of the world, pretty much every society found it necessary to track both the lunar and solar cycles for similar reasons. And this is still the case for our modern calendars. In 753 BC, Romulus, the founder of Rome, had created a standardized... Romulan. That's all I can think of is Sheldon going Romulan. In 753 BC, Romulus, the founder of Rome, had created a standardized Roman Republican calendar. Like today, it was made of roughly 30-day months, but there were only 10 of them, leaving a random 61-day chunk of winter at the end of every year. Well, that's kinda stupid, said the Roman king Numa Pompilius before introducing Januarius and Februarius in the year 713 BC. This worked for a while and was once again updated in 153 BC to have Januarius and Februarius at the beginning of the year. Now, you don't need to be a calendarologist to notice that we now have most of our 12 months in order. And although this gets us closer to what we recognize today, I think it's one of the more unnecessary and confusing decisions made in the process. At this point, half of the months were named according to their order in the calendar. Martius, Aprilis, Maius, and Junius were the first 4 months, Quintilis was the 5th, Sextilis was the 6th, Septilis was the 7th, October was the 8th, November was the 9th, and December was the 10th. Yes, moving Januarius and Februarius lined up Roman military training with the start of each year, but it forever offset the placement of every single month. Stupid. And speaking of the Roman military, the most popular Roman figure, Julius Caesar, had his own additions to the calendar. In fact, he completely overhauled the system and created the Julian calendar in the year 45 BC, which lasted for the next 1600 years. Despite the fact that, at this point, we had 12 months, each one was based on a lunar cycle, leaving us with 355 days as opposed to the 365 that make up a full solar year. Caesar fixed this by adjusting the length of each month and introducing an extra day every 4 years. After his assassination, Quintilis was renamed to Julius, and his great-nephew and the first Roman emperor, Augustus Caesar, would rename Sextilis to Augustus. And to think, we could have had a month with the abbreviation Sex. Before Julius Caesar's necessary adjustments, the calendar often drifted out of sync with the seasons, requiring manual realignment from Roman authorities. This has some really interesting and also some really terrifying implications, because not only were these adjustments inconsistent and often abused for political gain, but it's a reminder that the general population didn't really pay attention to the calendar, mostly relying on the well-educated or well-spoken leaders of the time. There's widespread speculation about how well we've kept time over the years. We can say that everything is relatively correct, but things like precise day or year counts are lost to history. There are even theories that entire centuries, civilizations, and historical figures never happened and were either manipulated for nefarious reasons or duplicated by mistake or misunderstanding. The final change to the calendar wouldn't come until 1582, when Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar to correct the way leap years are calculated. Julius Caesar assumed that one solar year was about 365 and a quarter days, but this number is actually more like 365 and 0.2422 days, meaning that the calendar drifted by about 10 days since the Julian calendar's creation.
The solution?
Well, instead of an extra day every 4 years, our friend Greg got mathematical. Starting in 1582 and continuing to this day, leap days are added to any year that is divisible by 4, but not divisible by 100 unless that year is also divisible by 400. So the year 1900 was not a leap year, the year 2000 was, and the year 2100 will not be. Makes sense unless you think that Pope Gregory was a liar. There's a famous theory called the phantom time hypothesis, which states that the years between 614 and 911 AD are missing from history, and this Gregorian adjustment to the calendar was just a sly way to cover up historical discrepancies surrounding the Holy Roman Empire. Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II both held power during the year 1000, but some believe their rule was much earlier and it was pushed forward by 300 years to seem more mystical. At first, the year 1000 seems like just a number, but it was the start of a new millennia, and it was exactly 1000 years after the birth of Christ, adding weight to pretty much any religious figures and decisions of that time. Now back to the Mayans. We know they had a 365-day calendar, and while we don't have exact proof that they were aware of the need for a leap year, there are a few clues to indicate that they did. The first is the Wayeb, which is a 5-day period that comes at the end of every year. The Hab, or the Mayan solar calendar, was actually made of 18 sets of 20-day months, leaving this 5-day gap at the end of every year that was often associated with supernatural activity and misfortune. The Mayans performed all kinds of rituals around this time, so it's not totally out of the question that they used the Wayeb to adjust their calendar when needed. The second and more obvious piece of evidence is that the Mayans were highly skilled mathematicians. Just one look at their celestial observations and their accuracy when predicting things like lunar and solar eclipses, and it's hard to imagine that they'd overlook something as important as an extra quarter of a day per year. And this actually leads into the third and final calendar, which not only specializes in tracking the larger cosmological cycles of the universe, but it finally brings us to the idea of a global cataclysm and the end of civilization. The Mayan long count calendar tracked the passage of time on a wider linear scale. This provides context for the other two calendars and divides up human history into large chunks. It also gives us a wider look at Mayan lore and what they believed when it came to the creation and destruction of their race. The calendar is broken down into units that are kind of similar to the ones we have today, with 1 kin equal to 1 day by modern standards, 20 kin making up 1 winal, 18 winals making up 1 tun, roughly 360 days, 20 tun making up 1 katun, about 7,200 days or 20 years, and 20 katun making up 1 baktun, which runs about 144,000 days or 394 years. If you didn't get any of that, it's okay. All you really need to remember is the baktun. According to the Popol Vuh, basically the Mayan Bible, planet Earth has gone through at least 3 major creation cycles, each lasting roughly 13 baktuns. In the first creation cycle, the gods made humans out of mud, which didn't really work. They were extremely fragile and couldn't speak, so the gods destroyed the world and created new humans out of wood. They were better, but lacked the kind of depth that can only be found in humans. So they destroyed the world again. Some historians believe there was a third creation out of stone or clay, but what we know for sure is that the final creation of man was out of maize dough in approximately the year 3114 BC. This not only marked the beginning of the current era of creation, it marked the end of the last great cycle with the completion of the 13th baktun. And what's wild is that their eras of creation and destruction roughly line up with our understanding of geographical and geological history. Each great cycle lasts roughly 13 baktuns or 5,125 years, and if we count back from the beginning of the Mayan civilization, we reach the year 8,238 BC, a period at the end of the Younger Dryas characterized by increased global temperatures and rising sea levels. Humans were beginning to transition from hunter-gatherer societies into agricultural societies, and not only did this geological shift likely drive out the many communities that strategically placed themselves near bodies of water, but it promoted many new crops like the aforementioned maize. It may have also facilitated the creation of agricultural society itself, as humans learned to rely less on the naturally available water and focused more on cultivating and maintaining it further inland. Go back another 13 Baktuns and we're in the year 13,636 BC, at the tail end of the last ice age, a time period notable for facilitating the global migration of humans and the extinction of many large plants and land animals. The implication here is that the Mayans had some kind of larger knowledge of the environmental patterns of Earth, which plays into long-standing suspicions that ancient humans were far more advanced than meets the eye. These days, you almost sound crazy for denying it, because you don't have to believe in aliens to acknowledge the extremely accurate architectural and cosmological measurements made by our ancestors. And this is one of the primary reasons many were sucked into the 2012 end-of-the-world panic. And now, a word from today's sponsor, W Energy. W combines the best of other pre-workouts to give you the most performance and the least amount of crash. It may seem like just another internet drink mix, but W is the only one that targets both your heart and your brain, containing 100 milligrams of coffee fruit extract, which is proven clinically for over 10 years to increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor levels by over 140%. Wow. That means more neurons, better cognitive performance, and better mental health. If you're in the gym, W contains amino acids like citrulline and taurine to help you burn more fat and maximize your gains. Not to mention a healthy dose of B vitamins to keep everything running smoothly. Oh, and unlike the other guys, W contains no maltodextrin and no artificial dyes. You know, the stuff they ban overseas? So what are you waiting for? Check out w.gg in the description and use code TV10 to get 10% off of your order. You're not just getting natural, jitterless energy, but you're supporting the channel. I need money. Now, back to the video. You know, earlier when I said that 3114 BC marked the last great creation cycle and the beginning of the current era? Well, that's not entirely true. If we count 13 Baktuns after the creation of man in the year 3114 BC, we arrive at the year 2012. More specifically, December 21st, 2012. And this was the infamous date that had many on the edge of their seats watching both the clock and the news. While it wasn't as widely feared as something like Y2K, it still proved to stir up the public and cause at least some small-scale doomsday preparation. One of the biggest indicators of legitimate panic is a spike in birth rates, and there was little to no evidence of this being the case in 2012. I think, with my non-existent degree in psychology, that it was because there was no immediate danger with 2012. It was just an arbitrary countdown with more logical reasoning against its legitimacy than for it. Just like we observed in the previous video with mysteries like Jack the Ripper, the 2012 panic can be largely attributed to the media, and wasn't even that big of a deal at the time. Look at news reports and you'd assume that it was the main topic on everyone's mind going into the 2012 Christmas holiday, but it just wasn't.
I do know about the Mayan calendar. I have done some research on it.
I was 9 years old in 2012, and I vaguely remember the countdown happening, talking about how the world might get hit by a giant asteroid or taken over by aliens. It was never really a legitimate concern, not like having a gun pointed to your head or cowering in the basement during an extreme weather event. Some believers did conflate 2012 with other negative trends like the internet, AI, global warming, and war in the Middle East, and while these topics are loosely connected, it's not in a way that would create some massive culminating doomsday, at least not all on the same day, and not on some random day in 2012. These are legitimate concerns, but the end of the Mayan calendar served more as a vessel for many concerns about the negative impacts of modern society. There were legitimate historical, mathematical, and cultural factors that disproved many of the conclusions made by fearmongers. But there was and still is an air of uncertainty surrounding the true meaning of the Mayan calendar, as modern archaeologists, mathematicians, historians, and even those carrying on the Mayan tradition in Mesoamerica today have a wide range of opinions and disagreements when it comes to the larger cycles that make up the Mayan world canon. But at the end of the day, the conclusion of the 13th Baktun was no different than the end of any other cycle, whether it be Sunday night into Monday or December back into January. I don't know if it was ever meant to be taken literally, which might sound like a giant axe to this entire video, but it actually opens up a brand new perspective that doesn't just add credibility to the Mayans, but it adds a whole new layer of terror to this video. Looking at 2012 metaphorically sounds like some kind of artistic cop-out, but it's actually a nice compromise between those who saw no significance in the day and those who thought it would spell the end of modern society. Not to mention, it's the way that many current-day Mayans have interpreted this event. When asked directly about the impending apocalypse, the Mayans did in fact believe that December 21st, 2012 was a day of large significance, but it was seen more as a time of rapid change, not rapid decline. Just like the Wayeb was a period of superstition, prayer, meditation, and rituals, the end of the 13th Baktun marked a time to reflect on the previous cycle and prepare for what's to come. And, well, yeah, coming into the 2010s, the world was entering a never-before-seen era of technology that would accompany and connect billions of people worldwide. We'll touch on more specific examples later in this video, but one of the biggest changes leading up to 2012 was smartphones and widespread access to information. Suddenly, children could access wildly inappropriate things without even trying, and society became a lot more in touch with the horrors that often lurk in the shadows. This idea that the world was suddenly more violent, more promiscuous, and more hedonistic reflected the narrative that often precedes the collapse of a society, like Rome or Qing Dynasty China. Society becomes more lavish, and those in power become more concerned with their lifestyles than with the well-being of the wider population. This general apathy or laziness in important decision-making has been observed for ages and is often rooted in timeless concepts of the sinful, animalistic, or general darker sides of the human race. And in an ironic twist, the Mayan civilization fell into this exact same trap towards their collapse in the end of the first millennia. Debates range on the exact cause, but historians agree that it was likely a mixture of changing climates, poor crop yields, political unrest, and fights with surrounding civilizations. There's not as much evidence of hedonism, but there is strong evidence to suggest the rich did exploit the underclass with political and religious manipulation. Public figures practiced bloodletting, either as an extreme measure to please the gods or as a way to prove their sincerity to the public. And just like in the modern day, apocalyptic narratives were used to control the public, creating distrust and weakening the overall bond of the nation. We've made a lot of comparisons between the Mayans and modern society, but one major difference is the measures taken to prevent catastrophe. The current day is all about convenience. Go to lunch somewhere and pay attention to just how much waste you create. Paper or plastic bag, plastic-coated paper cup, plastic straw, paper cover for the straw, plastic lid, paper bowl, foil bowl, all to save you a few seconds so you can make it back to work on time. Now, I'm not shaming anyone for this because I'd be a hypocrite, and there are many new technologies being used to drastically cut down on our negative environmental impact. But that impact just isn't at the forefront of our priorities. The Mayans constantly took measures to prevent disaster and promote good fortune through things like dances, rituals, and most infamously, sacrifices, all to appease the gods. I'm like 99% sure that dancing at the sun doesn't have an effect on the weather, but at the very least, it promotes artistic expression and general awareness of one's morality. Mindfulness, meditation, and other ritualistic grounding methods are popular today, but they're not promoted on a wide scale, at least not in the Western world. The mainstream has certainly been more receptive to alternative medicine and discussions on mental health since the pandemic, but in 2012, it was terrifying to think about where the world might end up if we didn't change our way of thinking. But remember, if we completely ignore the media narratives, we find that the public just wasn't as freaked out about 2012 as they were with things like COVID or Y2K. Maybe things would have been different if the Mayan calendar said, on December 21st, a giant meteor will hit Earth. It harkens back to a point I made earlier, that 2012 itself wasn't the cause of wide-scale panic, it was an avenue or a vessel that embodied the overarching concerns of modern society. For many, the idea of a cyclical world or universe is a religious one, intimately rooted within their understanding of themselves and the very fabric of reality. It's an idea that serves not just as a guide to the nature of mankind, but as reassurance that nothing is ever truly over, because your memory, your lineage, and your stories will live on. Well, the apocalypse stands in direct contrast to that entire thing. It says, to hell with your cycles, and defines a clear endpoint. Those with strong religious or philosophical beliefs can come to terms with the end, but it doesn't detract from the importance and the reality of the situation. Christianity is a good example because most of you watching this are familiar with the Rapture, or the second coming of Christ. This is all laid out in the book of Revelation, written by the Apostle John from visions given to him by Jesus through an angel. The events of Revelation haven't happened yet, and while certain things like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the millennial rule of Christ, and the Antichrist have been interpreted less literally over the years, the end is still the end. Other interpretations of the apocalypse see it as an ultimate karmic reckoning for humanity's sins, or in other words, it's something we've brought upon ourselves. There's also the grim reality that nature just doesn't care about who lives and dies. At any given moment, a massive celestial body like a star or a black hole could just show up and destroy us in an instant. And that's that. To avoid constantly panicking, you either have to choose ignorance or you have to acknowledge the threat and accept what you can and can't do about it. Funnily enough, one of my favorite games, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, explores this topic with a surprising amount of depth considering the fact that it's from the year 2000 and was made primarily for kids. Every character handles the falling of the moon a little differently. Some think that it's an overblown panic, some escape town in hopes of survival, and some accept the inevitable and spend their final moments with their loved ones. But when it comes to the less visible threats like global thermonuclear war, there's this kind of golden trust you need to have in yourself and others, and in everything. It's kind of sweet to step back and accept that you have no agency over fate, but there's always that intrusive doubt that weaves its way in, and even the most hardened philosophers can be crippled by the thought that human existence is so small that it borders on insignificance. Many will boil down the end of the world 2012 panic to panic, and that's exactly what it is, but it strips pretty much all depth of the entire subject, and fails to explain why these things keep happening regardless of where or when you go in history. I think there's something inside of all of us that resonates with the idea of a complete and ultimate end. Historically, many cultures celebrated, studied, and accepted death, but they developed this idea that a person's spirit could be carried on through their stories and wisdom. Take El Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, a modern incarnation of ancient Mesoamerican death rituals. The Mayans believed that if someone didn't die in an explicitly noble way, like in childbirth, in war, or as a sacrifice, they would travel through Xibalba, an underworld full of trials that would eventually lead them to the heavens. A person wasn't truly seen as dead until they stopped being honored or remembered in the physical world. But what if there aren't any people left in the physical world? As we mentioned earlier in the video, cycles are intimately tied in with human biological function. The ultimate goal is for your genes to outlast and outcompete the rest, and while there's not a clear reward for getting your DNA to last thousands of years, you can add meaning and value to your name by creating a strong and prosperous lineage. Anyone with that name or those genes directly point back to you, and after thousands of years, you could potentially influence millions of human lives. We see a lot of adherence to cycles when we look at ancient history, but the whole reason we still have that stuff is because someone decided to preserve it, or at the very least, create it in a way that makes it very difficult to unintentionally destroy. Some of these structures, namely the pyramids that can be found all over the world, don't even have an official creation date, it's just our best guess. But what's undoubtedly clear is that they were created to stand the test of time, and just like the calendars of the ancient world, they were created with a keen understanding of mathematical and geometric principles. And now we arrive back at the very first topic we discussed, how to communicate beyond the barriers of language. Sure, you can draw humanoid creatures and reference natural phenomena like the sun, the moon, and the stars, but if we had to create some kind of logical, self-explanatory communications device, how would we do it? Well, you might say create a book with the same phrase written in every language, which is exactly what the Egyptians did in 196 BC with the creation of the Rosetta Stone. It contained a message of respect from the Egyptians to the Greek king Ptolemy V, but more importantly, it was copied in ancient Greek, the commonly used Egyptian Demotic script, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. The discovery of this artifact in 1799 AD was monumental and allowed historians to make huge strides in the translation and understanding of ancient Egyptian inscriptions. It was also a pretty smart move on the part of the Egyptians, showcasing their insight into the importance of preserving history. But ironically, there's actually an Egyptian parable that warns against such preservation, showcasing this complex battle between living peacefully in the moment and hastily preparing for a worst-case scenario. To be totally clear, it's an Egyptian parable from a 4th century dialogue written by Plato, so it could have been real, but let's take its legitimacy with a grain of salt. I'm including it more for the message, so listen up, zip it. In this story, the Egyptian god of wisdom, Thoth, comes to King Famous with a new creation, writing. Now humans can record information in the physical world instead of juggling it all in their head. It'll improve education, historical documentation, and allow people to communicate non-verbally and even across large distances. But Famous saw it as a hindrance to communication, not an upgrade. Stories will be copied down without proper themes or context, important information will get lost in a sea of trivial facts, and the span of human consciousness will shrink as people take less time to organize their thoughts. We're even seeing a modern equivalent to this in a recent study that I saw. I'll put the link on screen, but basically this study found that people who use AI to help them write things remember far less about what they've written. Is the AI making people dumber because it's helping them too much? Or is the AI getting good at teaching people concepts, causing them to remember less of what they've written and more of the content of the entire thing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever tried to play a game while you're having some drinks or waiting in line with your friends, but you just can't seem to remember the rules despite playing the games many times before? You know you had fun, you probably remember the people you played with, and you might even know who won, but for some reason you just can't remember how to play. The fuzzy trace theory, created by Valerie F. Reyna and Charles J. Brain Nerd, yes, the psychologist's name is Dr. Brain Nerd, hypothesizes that we store information in two forms: verbatim, which represents specific details, and in gist, which represents the abstract meaning or general idea of something. In school, you may have been told by your teacher to retell something in your own words, or to study something well enough to teach it. This is at the root of the fuzzy trace theory, and it all supports the idea that stories, experiences, and wisdom have a better shot at sticking around for extended periods of time, be it within someone's mind or someone's community. This is one of the major ways that ancient wisdom made it to the modern day, and according to speculation from many historians, scientists, and anthropologists, it could be at the root of religion itself. Stories are much easier to remember than long strings of information. I actually have first-hand anecdotal evidence of this being the case. During the making of this video, I traveled to Europe and I climbed Mount Pilatus in Switzerland. I don't remember any facts about the mountain other than it's 7,000 feet tall, but what I do remember is the entire legend of the dragon that supposedly lived on top of the mountain and healed people using this magical crystal. You should look it up, it's cool. A good story has lots of details, not for the listener to remember and recite later, but for the listener to feel as though they are living the story themselves in that moment. Think about Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings. There are people you interact with every single day who know these worlds inside and out, and you might even be one of them. Yet, when it comes to a history class, the results are a lot different. Well, when a story is told, it's custom tailored to the audience, and usually has some theme or lesson to take away. Otherwise, it's not really worth remembering. Characters, humor, and exciting events can be balanced in ways that keep listeners invested. When a story is taught as a list of facts, it loses its wider meaning. It fails to teach us anything, and it just isn't exciting. I think the point that King Famous, which I guess would actually be Plato, is trying to make is that an emotionally and intellectually impactful story is a much better teacher than a square with some letters on it. Some translations of the Horace Themis story even refer to memory itself as an art, implying that there is some kind of conscious effort we need to be making to ponder, discuss, optimize, and internalize the ideas that we consume on a daily basis. You can have a bunch of books, you can even know a bunch of facts, but do you actually understand your subject inside and out? Well enough to debate it? Well enough to pass it on to your children? Storytelling sounds like a great idea, especially if you want to build a strong society, but it's not completely infallible. One thing that I purposely left out of the Mayan conversation is that we don't totally know if the Mayan religion was something everyone truly believed and followed, or if it was required by Mayan government and instituted as a state religion. All my anti-big government friends out there are pumping their fists because forcibly making your population read and follow a set of stories is not the most effective way of passing on wisdom, and can even be counterintuitive. But whether or not Mayan Joe was an atheist or not is irrelevant to the point that we've discovered a tremendous amount of information about their civilization and other ancient civilizations through the stories they've passed down to us. After the fall of the Mayans, many of them migrated to new areas and were able to keep their lineage alive. Between the findings of archaeologists and conversations with the Maya of the modern day, we've made tremendous headway in our understanding of their civilization and others of the Americas. But what if I told you that there was a far more powerful, more objective method of transmitting information? Something that has not only told us a tremendous amount about ancient civilizations, but brings into question just how much they knew. It's something that we in the modern day have even used as a way to communicate with other intelligent life that may be passing through our solar system. I'm of course referring to mathematics, or as Galileo put it, the language in which God has written the universe. I've been doing a lot of HTML coding for work, and not only are there a lot of little tags and formats you have to do to make everything work correctly, but you end up just copying and pasting huge chunks of code because it's way easier than writing everything from scratch. That's kind of how we work within the bounds of reality. Matter, or code, cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed or manipulated. Breaking these natural laws would be playing God and could have disastrous consequences. If we look at the passage of time as a series of cause and effects, we could theoretically track every atom's journey from the beginning to the end of time. But adding or subtracting atoms anywhere between these 2 points is like throwing a new, unpredictable species into a thriving ecosystem. Imagine going into YouTube's code and just inserting a bunch of random text. Even if it seemed fine at first, the effects of this rogue code will ripple throughout the entire website, be it visually or functionally. As we've discussed in previous videos, math implies some fundamental nature of reality, and any particle physicist or chemist could have told you that. But what's really strange is that archaeologists could have told you that as well. A physicist looks at the math and properties behind natural phenomena and creates some kind of cohesive understanding of how it all works. An archaeologist does the same, but with the history and culture of various dig sites. And not only do we have consistent traditions and stories across many disconnected ancient cultures, but we find the same complex geometry, symbols, and mathematical concepts put into practice, hinting at a potential theory of everything that may have governed and even connected the humans of the ancient past. There's even a theory that math preceded written language, originating as a method to track the growth, maintenance, and storage of crops during early agricultural society. As far back as the year 1900 BC, the Babylonians not only had a robust numerical and calendar system akin to the Mayan vigesimal system, they even had a rough understanding of pi, quadratics, and the Pythagorean theorem, which wouldn't be discovered by Pythagoras until nearly 1500 years later. Not to mention the golden ratio, which is similar to pi in that it is a naturally occurring pattern that can be observed and measured all over the world. As a matter of fact, these values go beyond just planet Earth and can be used to make calculations across the known universe. Aliens might not know that this symbol represents 3.14 on our number system, but they would recognize it as the ratio of any circular or spherical object's circumference divided by its radius squared. And the same is true of the golden ratio. The only way satellites, moons, rings, planets, solar systems, and galaxies can exist is by spiraling through outer space. While not every spiral comes out to the magic 1.618, it's a good approximation for these patterns and carries with it the Fibonacci sequence, yet another mathematical ratio that transcends subjective number systems. And for this reason, pi, phi, and a host of other symbols and inscriptions are present on the famous golden disk that was sent out to the cosmos aboard Voyager 1 and 2 in 1977. Pi and phi aren't explicitly spelled out on the disk, but our inclusion of sound frequencies and binary information display our application of these principles in technological innovation. Sound itself is composed of rotating harmonic waves, and by including sounds and videos of planet Earth with instructions on how to play them, we're letting extraterrestrials know how rich our culture and our universal understanding really is. Other inscriptions include hydrogen atoms, which can be used as a clock to figure out the rotational speed needed to play the record accurately. That's cool. There's also a cool diagram of the sun's location relative to 14 nearby stars and each of their frequencies, but by far the coolest addition is uranium-238, whose radioactive decay will serve as a future-proof manufacturing date. These are universal symbols, or at the very least they reference some of the basic building blocks of our reality. And to think that one day this intergalactic Rosetta Stone might be found after the last humans have died off or scattered across the cosmos, well, it just gives us all a little bit of solace. And if you were an ancient human who understood the nature of mankind, the fact that a flood, an ice age, a horrific war, a drought, or a volcano could wipe out life on Earth in an instant, well, it makes you want to, I don't know, build massive structures and encode esoteric knowledge within them. One of the most iconic symbols that has remained popular to this day is the Ouroboros, a circular snake eating its own tail, first discovered in the tomb of King Tutankhamun. It's supposed to represent the eternal cycles of life, death, and rebirth, but it goes a little deeper in the context of mathematical and spiritual concepts like infinity and balance. I think the snake is a stand-in for humanity, as it's not only destroying itself, but it's constantly trying to evade itself. Because we live in a human world bound by human rules, needs, and instincts, a lot of our conflicts are inherently human ones. Even if we assume that humanity really only began within the last 10,000 years, we've still survived multiple apocalyptic scenarios. There's a concept from Darwin that states that it is not the strong that survive, but it is those who adapt, and humans are really good at this. We've used our intelligence to create tools, clothing, and a general sense of science that has allowed us to propagate most of the planet's solid ground, where our natural environment was probably supposed to be some kind of temperate or tropical location by a large body of water. There's a wealth of ancient philosophy, particularly Greek philosophy, that explores these same ideas. The idea that the only thing you can predict in this world is that everything is unpredictable, and by embracing that chaos, or in a more traditional sense, trusting the will of God, you can live more peacefully and productively. My point is that all of these mathematical, philosophical, and religious ideas lead back to the same place, which, again, raises the question of just how informed the ancient world was, how connected it might have been, and even how many apocalypses we've already been through. Well, we know without a shadow of a doubt that ancient civilizations were highly advanced. Humans didn't just become intelligent yesterday, we've always been logical problem solvers and innovators, likely discovering the nature of frequencies and physics through decades of experimentation. While I don't discount the idea that ancient civilizations were all connected through some proto-pyramid-based internet, I think it's more likely that the similarities found between cultures is a result of convergent evolution. The idea that these fundamental concepts and their importance were not invented by the smartest humans, they were discovered. The Mayans believed we've already gone through some major cycles, and as the days go by, it's getting harder and harder to disagree with them. I could do an entire video on the Giza complex alone. We have no idea truly how old the pyramids or the Sphinx are, if they were built by the Egyptians or merely discovered by them, and according to new LiDAR scans from the Caffrey project, there's apparently a chamber underneath them that goes 2 kilometers into the ground. And we may never get answers to these questions, as governments and cultural advocates have instituted strict rules about archaeological digs after poor encounters with grave robbers and looters. But the point I'm getting at is that we may be living in a lot older of a world than we think. Who's to say we didn't have a thriving society 100,000 years ago that was swept away in some catastrophe? There's been construction outside of my apartment for the past month, and something hit me when I looked out the window the other day. The road, the sidewalk, the trees and landscaping, it only goes down a few feet at most, and then you hit the mountain rock that it was all built upon. 1 or 2 earthquakes and a few hundred years of rain and plant growth, and it's right back to the mountains and forests that have been here for hundreds of millions of years. This is certainly not an original idea. As we discussed earlier, it's a component of many religions. Either through man's sinful nature or by directly challenging divine authority, humankind is struck down and forced to start over and over again. Pyramids and Mesolithic structures aren't the only evidence that we've fallen from grace before. Some believe that locations like the Devil's Tower, featured in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Mount Roraima of South America, and the Giant's Causeway of Northern Ireland are massive stumps of ancient trees, and they have even housed highly advanced cities. They are largely written off as basalt columns resulting from volcanic activity, but there are hundreds of other seemingly natural canyons, mountains, and land formations that the highly skeptical attribute to ancient humans and the threats they may have faced. There are even similar geologic formations found on other planets, like Mars, which, beneath its surface, scientists have recently concluded the presence of large water deposits. Water deposits that very well may contain life, as evidenced by new fish and bacteria species that have been discovered beneath the surface of Antarctica. NASA actually just announced the most convincing evidence for life on Mars. I recommend watching Anton Petrov's video on it. He does a really good job breaking the whole situation down and explaining all of the nuances. The short version is that NASA found iron oxide and iron sulfites in certain formations in their rock samples that indicate that they were produced by something living. And as of the making of this video, they haven't found any other explanation. I don't think we're gonna find a race of mer people living on Mars, but every day we're adding more credibility to the theory of panspermia, which hypothesizes that a thriving civilization once lived on Mars some 4 billion years ago, and attempted to send either itself or some other highly adaptive life form to restart on planet Earth. This would have been around the time that Mars was exiting the habitable zone and losing its atmosphere and magnetic field, so perhaps in the wake of some global climate crisis or even a worldwide nuclear war, Mars sent out their own golden disk which set the stage for life on Earth. Another theory is that the Martians never sent life here, they simply ran out of time and it became Earth's turn to try out the whole thing for itself. Earth is often heralded by both science and religion as a miracle. Between our temperature, our atmosphere, and our proximity to celestial bodies, it's the perfect spot for something as fragile as life to thrive. But what if, instead of humans happening to appear in these conditions, we appeared as a result of these conditions? Just because a planet isn't in the habitable zone now doesn't mean it can't get there eventually, and perhaps intelligent life is just part of the natural cycle of a planet, from formation to stability and then eventually destruction, either by nature or at the hands of the very creatures that depend on it for survival. We've talked about how, since the Industrial Revolution, humanity has seen a sharp increase in power consumption, CO2 emissions, global population, and innovation that doesn't seem to be slowing down. This is what I believe to be at the root of most modern apocalyptic fears, be it international spyware, cyber attacks, nuclear bombs, the fragility of the global power grid, or the mother of all, AI. Before discussing any modern technology, we have to look at the end of the 20th century, as it not only provides context to the rapid advancement of computers in the past 50 years, but it leads directly into the first modern techpocalypse scare, Y2K. As we approached the end of the millennia, computer engineers and programmers became increasingly concerned about computer systems and how they were going to handle the switch from the year 1999 to the year 2000. Since the invention of computers, dates were stored as 6 digits, 2 for the month, 2 for the day, and 2 for the year. October 26, 1985, for example, would be written as 102685, a really easy and cost-effective way to store temporal data. This is great, but how do you know it isn't encoding October 26, 1885, or 2085? And what happens when the year goes from 99 back to 0? Are computers equipped to handle this switch on their own? This was the focal point of Y2K, and while the panic was largely self-fulfilling, perpetuated by media outlets looking to increase their ratings, there were real concerns held by real experts. There was also a cultural concern, as the year 2000 kind of stood as this unofficial marker that the future was here. Computers were becoming more integrated with our daily lives, and although they were cool and revolutionized the way we got things done, many were skeptical and waited for complications to appear. Hence Y2K, which served as both a consequence of rapid technological expansion and a warning against its prominence in the future. Just like we adapted to a world of violent creatures and extreme weather, it was time for us to adapt to a new millennia of technology. But that's just one of many interpretations historians and computer scientists have when looking back from the current day. In order to better understand the event as it was unfolding, let's draw a little chart to examine each of the 4 main opinions held by the public leading up to Y2K. The first is the irrationally unafraid. These people largely ignored the potential dangers of Y2K, either because it didn't affect their daily lives, because they didn't trust the claims being made by these supposed experts, or simply because it's easier to be ignorant and dismissive than it is to research and formulate an opinion on something that everyone's talking about. The second group is the irrationally afraid. Perhaps not the largest group of the 4, but definitely the loudest. These are the people who became swept up in the panic and turned to traditional doomsday preparation, gathering toiletries, weapons, ammunition, food, and other resources like gasoline. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but the media certainly didn't help ease anyone's concerns. Not when Time magazine's cover story reads, "The Y2K bug is something akin to the original sin of technological society, a mortal flaw bred into the very bones of the modern world." Yeah, that's not dramatic at all. But there is a point to be made here. Our comms, our navigation systems, our power grid, airports, millions of retirement and investment accounts, and even satellites could be affected by global computer errors, highlighting just how fragile our technology really is. Imagine being in the center of New York City during the start of the apocalypse, or near your nation's border when a neighboring country decides to take advantage of the situation and invade. Kind of like the Tower of Babel, we let our arrogance, our unchecked innovation take the lead without carefully planning for future generations, and because of it, they have to start over. If you remember earlier, we talked about the phantom time hypothesis, a theory that states that the Holy Roman Emperor falsified history in order to place Pope Sylvester II and Emperor Otto III's rule in the year 1000. A nice round 1,000 years after the birth of Christ adds an air of spirituality to the events taking place at that time, and I'd argue the same is true for the year 2000. Not only was there an increase in religious cults around the late 90s, their concerns largely aligned with rapid technological advancement and transformation, and in many cases, these organizations directly called it out as part of the rapidly declining state of the world. Heaven's Gate and the Solar Temple both ended with mass suicides, which they believed were voluntary ascensions to the passing Hale-Bopp comet and the star Sirius, respectively. But even traditional churches saw rising apocalyptic anxieties as a sign of the end times, with the 20th century culminating in the second coming of Christ or the arrival of the Antichrist. One group, the Concerned Christians, even believed that their leader, Monte Kim Miller, would die and be resurrected in Israel, implying that he was the second coming of Christ. Science and technology are very contentious topics within religion, as some believe it to be a gift that we should be encouraged to pursue in order to broaden our understanding of the world, while others see it as an affront to the divine and a statement of human superiority. Many religions, from Hinduism and Buddhism to Judaism and Islam, and even New Age spiritual beliefs, had various ways of interpreting Y2K, but the majority agreed that they should reflect, observe, and try to learn from the rapidly evolving state of technology. It kind of sounds like how the Mayans dealt with periods of change, right? It really makes you think, are these stories and lessons truly timeless and will transition into the next world with some bumps and scrapes? Or is this technology, which has never been seen before, something so alien that the entire system will collapse in on itself? This internal conflict between assurance and doubt is what fuels the panic behind every single end of the world scenario, and controlling it is the key to rational thinking and problem solving. The third major reaction to Y2K was the rationally unafraid. These people examined the evidence, the history of computer technology, and the potential dangers of data storage failures, and said, probably not as big of a deal as everyone's making it out to be. This encompassed a large amount of the population and criticized the sensationalism in a logical and non-dismissive way. It didn't deny the dangers of a global digital collapse, it just didn't apply a sense of urgency to the situation. See, Y2K reflected the software crisis of the 1960s, where a sudden increase in the power and scale of computer systems required us to completely restructure the way we wrote and implemented programs. Up until that point, the majority of code existed in the form of punch cards that were fed into a machine, with no way of testing or adjusting the contents without completely starting over. For context, when I'm working in HTML, which is primarily used for websites, I'll make multiple changes per minute, sometimes within the span of just a few seconds. This would have been impossible in the past, as any amendment to a piece of programming had to be written out, meticulously checked for errors, and turned into its own punch card. The process of making a punch card wasn't too bad, but they were often prepared in batches, bringing projects to a screeching halt in the presence of the tiniest syntax error. It was an expensive setback, but it was necessary to move forward, and in the end we made it through, so why would it be any different 40 years later? Well, this is where we reach the fourth and final opinion on Y2K, the rationally afraid. This was not only the dominant viewpoint in the years leading up to the switch, but it is directly responsible for much of the preventative measures put in place to help mitigate any potential damage. But unfortunately, for all of the goodwill and intentions, it ended up directly fueling the media's doomsday narrative. Computers are complex and difficult to fully explain to everyday people. Maybe it's easier these days, but in 1999, only about half of United States households had computers. I'm sure you've seen the clips of Congress completely misunderstanding how social media, iPhones, and AI work in the modern era. Now imagine the panic that could unfold in a time where the dominant source of information was still TV and newspapers, with maybe a handful of online blogs. Acknowledging that there is in fact real danger is like opening Pandora's box. Even the most hardened public figures and mental masters are subject to that intrusive doubt we discussed earlier. And adding credence to the idea of a potential future apocalypse can leave people more susceptible to fear-mongering and other dubious forms of emotional manipulation. But in return, this better safe than sorry approach by computer scientists and politicians was really crucial in reducing the impact of Y2K. It could have been much worse. Not much really happened after Y2K passed, which initially sounds like a great thing, but it's a little more complex than that. Preparations began in 1996 when Stephen Horn, the representative of California's 38th Congressional District, held the first Y2K hearing to clear up the rapidly growing concerns about the end of the decade. Utah Senator Robert Bennett, who actually served as the chair of the Senate's Special Committee on Y2K, put it best by stating, "We have to be Paul Revere, but not be Chicken Little. We can't make Y2K a self-fulfilling prophecy." An estimated $300 to $600 billion was spent on Y2K worldwide, with $8 to $9 billion spent by the US government between subsidies to tech companies, new government programs, and incentivizing grunt workers to reprogram computer systems. This is what Peter was doing in the movie Office Space, manually changing code for the 2000 Switch, pretty much the most tedious and soulless thing a guy in his late 20s could be doing. Another person worth mentioning is Peter de Jager, a South American advocate for this same cautious yet rational approach to the Y2K problem. Not just because he's from outside the United States, but because he was openly optimistic about our preemptive response, even boosting morale during a meeting with the United Nations in December of 1988. To answer the question of how computers handled the shift from 99 back to 0, well, many of them just did, the same as any other tally count. And combined with the efforts made to store dates as 8 digits instead of 6, there was little to no confusion by the time January 1st, 2000 rolled around. To say that we overreacted, I think, is inaccurate for a few reasons. First of all, the global response was very well implemented, and while there may have been better ways of informing the public, I think those who led the charge did a pretty great job preventing any potential disasters, considering this was the dawn of a new era of advanced technology and interconnectivity. But if you want my honest opinion, I think we not only underreacted, but completely dropped the ball when it came to our long-term response. At the core of the Y2K problem was this idea that humanity, with its wonderful creativity and innovation, is slowly replacing its societal framework with a house of cards. With the popularity of movies like The Matrix and The Bicentennial Man, it was clear that the public began adopting this idea that our over-reliance on technology may one day be the death of us. And after narrowly avoiding extinction in the Second World War, in the software crisis of the 1960s, in the Cold War, and eventually Y2K, we chose yet again to push forward into powers beyond our comprehension. As a matter of fact, many of the scholars from the Y2K era weren't as concerned about a global technological collapse as they were about a global techocracy, and that nightmare has all but come true in recent years. By preventing the disaster, we may have deprived ourselves of a crucial learning opportunity and only pushed off this inevitable technological collapse until a later date. Another massive fumble from Y2K was a complete lack of media accountability. In previous videos, we talked about how for hundreds of years the media has been manipulated for political or financial gain. But this isn't a green light to completely ignore the issue as a given when it comes to national or global emergencies. And it's only gotten worse in the past 25 years, with unbelievable political division in the 2010s directly resulting from big pharma, big tech, and big government's involvement with legacy news stations and social media platforms. The three biggest takeaways from Y2K were, and still are, that we need to reduce panic and stay calm in the face of catastrophe. We must secure the weak points of our society, like the fragile computer systems that govern much of modern life. And we must not let our pride, which manifests itself in our wonderful, better-than-China technology, be our downfall. Considering the fact that these lessons are timeless and can even be found in the same ancient religions that we spent so much time discussing, it really makes you wonder if we'll ever learn from our mistakes. This video started out with one simple question: why does it always feel like the world is ending? Prophecies of the apocalypse have been around for millennia, and there have definitely been a range of cataclysmic events throughout the history of civilization. But why does it seem like the past 100 years have been dotted with very legitimate concerns about the end of the human race? If you've looked into modern history, you might have heard of something called the Great Acceleration, and it's a term that describes this exponential growth of science, technology, industry, culture, and communications that came from the Industrial Revolution and took off at the end of World War II. Figures like Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein showed us how fragile and insignificant life really is in the face of even a single atom. It's a terrifying thought, but you have the choice to let the fear and despair consume you, or you can recognize and act on the things that are truly important, be it your family, your country, your religion, or something else. But do you really have the choice? We can sit here all day and talk about how enlightened we are, but the truth is, myself, many of you out there, and many of the world's smartest and wisest figures have this feeling that we might be headed for extinction before the end of this century, potentially even before the end of the decade. We've seen what a pandemic does to the mental and physical health of a nation, we've seen what technology does to the development of children, and we've even seen a resurgence in multinational war. The change of global climate, whether you believe it to be caused by humans or not, will eventually cause a shift in land borders, ecosystems, and ocean currents, just as we've observed many times throughout the Earth's existence. And it's no wonder people continue to fear a global blackout. It's a completely real possibility in the face of a solar flare, a geomagnetic event, or a well-placed attack from a major world power. Let's go back to the question of whether or not the world truly did end in 2012, because out of any year, it represents the 0 point of a massive cultural, technological, and political shift we've been observing over the past 25 years. It's also the year we discovered the Higgs boson particle, which some believe may have connected us with a parallel universe, resulting in the Mandela effect, the phenomenon where large groups of people seem to remember a specific fact in a completely different way. Through high-speed particle acceleration, CERN was able to smash particles together at near light speed to influence and reveal the existence of parallel energy fields. Yeah, that's not going to cause any problems. As we discussed earlier, 2012 also marked a major point in cell phone usage, and by the middle of the decade, they were the most popular mobile device in the world, leading to the growth of social media websites, digital advertising, and further accelerating our consumption of energy and natural resources. The same year, 2012, Facebook acquired Instagram, and millions of people began a dangerous obsession with, and even addiction to, online content. I remember when the concern used to be video game addiction in teenagers, but that's nothing compared to social media addiction, which has proven time and time again to have extremely negative effects on the social and linguistic development of children. And it's not just the young kids. Teenagers are among some of the most negatively impacted on platforms like Instagram, which, from the beginning, was designed to pit users against each other in a contest of validation. Whether you're comparing your looks, your follower counts, or your lifestyles, you wind up feeling like shit, and Facebook is actively being sued for knowing this information and doing nothing about it. Mental health is at an all-time low as our creature comforts are giving us less and less of a reason to get out of bed every day, and whether this is a product of our adaptation to modern life or something that's been there all along, it's yet another change to the way we carry out our daily lives. On the bright side, memes were rapidly evolving at this time, and platforms like Vine and Twitter helped usher in a new era of quotable, absurd, and self-referential humor that was accessible to more than just computer nerds. Harambe alone made such a large cultural impact that some credit his death as the beginning of post-ironic, post-modern humor. This was also kind of a golden era for YouTube, with Gangnam Style becoming the first video to reach 1 billion views, bringing together music and quirky humor from both the East and the West. But alongside this revolution in worldwide communication, a massive political divide would begin to emerge, especially in the West. It's a lot better these days, but in the 2010s, you could be cornered, interrogated, and ridiculed for your political opinions, even if you didn't have any opinions. This is yet another factor that contributed to negative social interactions online, breeding fear and mistrust between the friends and families that make up the framework of civilization. Then the pandemic hit, and boy was all that technology really handy. Yeah, it made us more dependent on it, and it ruined an entire generation of babies and toddlers, but it put things into perspective and fueled the movement towards honesty and transparency on a personal and political level. Our reliance on technology has only continued to grow, but it seems like more people have been getting outside and appreciating the little things lately. There was kind of this hopeful optimism coming into 2025, and I don't think it's completely diminished. It's funny how things have a way of working themselves out. Even the most negative world events have at least one good thing come out of them. But what if a world event was so monumental that it would tip the scale past the breaking point and completely flip everything on its head? I'm talking about the creation of a god birthed from the hands of the world's most esteemed geniuses: artificial intelligence. As a matter of fact, just like the Manhattan Project, major world powers, with the addition of large tech conglomerates, are all competing to create the world's first artificial general intelligence, a completely autonomous and highly intelligent being that could reason as well as, if not better than, a human. While some see this as the ultimate tool of reason, or a co-pilot that could assist humanity in our everyday tasks, others worry that it will become too powerful. Think of how many animals can already kill a human being, and now invent one that can hook into the internet, the power grid, the global stock exchange, and even satellite systems. It doesn't have to hate us, it just has to see us as a threat, and like a mother bear protecting her children or fire spreading across a mountainside, AI may act more as a force of nature than a being of human morals and ideals. Just like Y2K, it's hard to say whether or not this impending AI apocalypse is really as dangerous as it's made out to be. And while previous media panic may have been driven by journalists, news stations, and experts with legitimate concerns, the underlying attitude towards AI seems to be emerging from everyone independently. Personally, I've been on the pulse of AI since about January of 2024, using it every day and contemplating the impact of every major development with a sense of cautious optimism. But once Google VO3 came out, for the first time I got a deep, uneasy feeling that this stuff is getting way out of hand. We're still a ways off of artificial general intelligence, but we're seeing AI get better at handling specific tasks. Take iOS 26, for example, which makes great use of AI's ability to simulate glass, metal, and other similar materials. Anything with a smooth surface and a crystalline molecular structure can be easily calculated by algorithms in real time, resulting in some absolutely beautiful imagery that has started to reel in some of the AI naysayers. Yeah, it's AI slop, but it's also a glowing blue raspberry, bro. We're also starting to see the rise of AI animals, humanoids, and vehicles who can autonomously perform tasks in the real world, like planting and harvesting crops, delivering packages, and even performing basic chores around the house. It's crazy to see this technology, which has been depicted in pop culture for over 100 years, finally arrive. And whether it was just a lucky guess or a fulfillment of our own fantasies, I think it's only going to become cheaper and more widely available. Filling our homes, towns, and cities with autonomous machines might sound like we're leaving ourselves open to an AI uprising, but there's still the question of true artificial intelligence even being possible, or if it'll merely be the illusion of intelligence created through complex programming and decision-making. And this philosophical idea of sentience goes beyond just machines, as we begin to wonder if human choices are just the result of biological programming. This implies that our own intelligence is an illusion, and our lives are just how we interpret the things that happen around us. You see why it was so imperative to start this video with ancient society, because at the end of it all, the same questions emerge. Why are we really here? Is it just to create artificial intelligence and then call it a day? The concept of creating not just AI, but artificial life is so widely understood and feared that some are seeing it as the creation of the Antichrist. AI has also made it a lot harder to tell what's real online, as it has become better and better at creating photos, videos, and sounds. Even conversations with unrestricted AI are starting to feel like conversations with real people. It's not perfect, but it only needs to say a couple of sentences to help you with your Wi-Fi, or to steal your grandma's bank information. It's definitely a good thing that we're getting more skeptical towards what we see on the internet, but it won't be long before we can't trust any of it, and we'll only be able to rely on the things we've seen with our own two eyes. Unless we're already inside of a simulation and everything we've ever seen has been computer generated. Maybe humanity was in a position much like ours, facing planetary threats and an uncontrollable explosion in technological advancement. So they decided to upload themselves into a computer and start over. Or perhaps we're just one of many pet universes that have been created for research purposes. If it feels real to everyone, then it's real, right? Between these two ideas, the apocalypse and the idea that we live inside of a simulation, there's one common thread, that at the end of the day, it was all for naught and nothing ever really mattered. Now, isn't that the most terrifying concept of all? Well, it depends on how you see it. On one hand, your actions and their consequences don't really matter, whether you're righteous, hedonistic, or cruel and unfair. But on the other hand, it's inspiring. It makes you want to take advantage of the time you have and live a full life of love and humility. There's also the choice to continue messing with powers that are beyond our comprehension, researching the ancient world in hopes of finding some form of ethereal energy or extraterrestrial assistance, merging with the machines, or attempting to jump to other planets. This video is kind of petering out on some loose ends, but that's kind of where we are right now. The future of AI is uncertain, the future of the planet is uncertain, and there are a lot of moving parts and shifting perspectives right now. It's hard to say where we'll be by the end of the decade, where artificial general intelligence is supposed to make its debut, but I'm gonna stay cautiously optimistic because I have a feeling that things are only just getting started. And that's all I got for you guys. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Check out my Instagram and TikTok, I'm active on both. Peace. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end, and I feel fine, and it's the end.